In the remote mountains of Oregon, where trees grow so dense they block sunlight even at midday, there exists a place that locals avoid mentioning. Crater Lake was once a small community surviving on timber extraction and hunting. It was a place where secrets could be buried as deeply as the roots of century-old sequoias. The legend I'm about to tell was born in these wild lands where isolation transformed ordinary people into something very different. It's one of the most disturbing stories about the limits of human nature, about how far a family can go to protect their darkest secrets. On an isolated property miles from the nearest town, two twin siblings made a decision that would shock any civilized person. But what was discovered years later hidden in the dark corners of their home would reveal that some horrors are far worse than anyone could imagine. The Oates property sat at the end of a dirt road that snaked for miles through dense forest. Waldo Oates had bought this land when he was still young and ambitious, dreaming of building a timber empire. The main house, a sturdy two-story structure made from the very logs he cut, stood at the center of a large plot. Waldo was known in the region as a hard-working but reserved man. His wife had died in childbirth with the twins, leaving him to raise Phoebe and Wilbert alone. The nearest neighbors lived some distance away, and they rarely saw the Oates family in town. Phoebe and Wilbert grew up practically isolated from the outside world. They were pale children with almost white blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. From an early age, they demonstrated an unusual connection that made any visitor uncomfortable. They frequently finished each other's sentences and seemed to have a mutual understanding that dispensed with words. The family's isolation intensified after an incident when the twins were still children. During one of their rare visits to town, Phoebe had been ridiculed by other children. Waldo, furious, decided that the family didn't need outside society. From that moment on, visits to town became even more sporadic. As they grew older, Waldo began to notice behaviors that made him uneasy. The twins spent hours locked in the attic, and sometimes he found them sitting in absolute silence, just looking at each other. They had developed the habit of communicating through glances and subtle gestures, a silent language that completely excluded Waldo. The situation became even stranger when Waldo discovered that the twins had begun sleeping in the same room. When questioned, they simply responded that it was natural. During this period, Waldo noticed that the twins had begun studying books left by their paternal grandfather, a man who had been considered eccentric. The library included texts on genealogy and some old treatises on family lineages. One spring, Waldo went down to town to buy supplies. It was then that a local merchant asked him about the wedding preparations he had heard about. Waldo was confused. There were no wedding preparations whatsoever. But when he pressed for details, he discovered that Phoebe had been in town earlier buying white fabric and talking about a ceremony that would take place within the family. Waldo realized the twins had made this trip without his knowledge. Upon returning home, Waldo confronted the twins. What he discovered would disturb him for the rest of his life. Phoebe and Wilbert, sitting side by side, calmly explained that they had decided to get married, not to other people, but to each other. They had reached this conclusion after months of discussion and study of their grandfather's books. Waldo exploded in indignation, citing the Bible and the laws of nature, but the twins remained impassive. They argued that many important families in history had practiced marriages between relatives to preserve their special characteristics. They had thought through all the practical aspects of their decision. The ceremony took place on a May morning on the property grounds behind the house. There was no pastor. There were no guests, just Phoebe, Wilbert, and Waldo, who was forced to serve as witness. After the improvised ceremony, the twins moved to the main bedroom of the house. Waldo, deeply disturbed, began avoiding the house during the day, spending long hours at the sawmill. The months that followed brought an atmosphere of growing tension. Waldo noticed that the twins had begun making modifications to the house. They installed extra locks on doors, covered some windows with boards, and began digging something in the basement. When questioned, they simply said they were preparing for the future. They also began making strange purchases in town, buying large quantities of non-perishable food and construction materials. Not long after, it became clear that Phoebe was pregnant. The news should have brought joy, but instead it brought a heavy silence. During the pregnancy, the twins became even more reserved. The first child was born on a stormy night. Waldo was awakened by screams, but when he tried to help, Wilbert prevented him from entering the room. The screams lasted for hours, followed by a silence that was even more disturbing. When he was finally allowed to see the child, Waldo understood the secrecy. The baby, a girl, had visible deformities. But what shocked him most was the parents' reaction. Instead of sadness or concern, they seemed satisfied, almost fascinated by the child's unusual characteristics. In the following months, Waldo rarely saw the baby, whom the twins kept constantly in their room. The second pregnancy came quickly. During this time, Waldo began hearing sounds coming from the basement during the night, something that sounded like a child crying. When he mentioned this, the twins explained it was just the wind. The second baby was born during a blizzard. This time, Waldo wasn't even informed until everything was over. When he finally saw the child, a boy, he was surprised to discover that it appeared completely normal. But there was something disturbing about how the twins reacted. Instead of satisfaction, they seemed disappointed, as if the child's normalcy was a flaw. Waldo noticed that the twins had begun treating the two children completely differently. The first, with her deformities, received constant attention. The second, apparently normal, was frequently neglected. It was during the following winter that Homer Mixon first appeared at the property. Homer was an experienced hunter who had noticed smoke coming from the oats chimney at strange hours and decided to investigate. On his visit, he was cordially received, but noticed several strange things. He didn't see or hear any children. There was a strange, medicinal smell in the house. The twins behaved with an unsettling coordination. The house had been significantly modified, with windows covered and new locks installed. Homer asked to use the bathroom and heard the unmistakable sound of a child crying coming from somewhere beneath his feet. When he mentioned it, the twins' reaction was immediate and cold. They insisted he must have heard the wind. Homer left with the feeling he had stumbled upon something fundamentally wrong. He began asking discreet questions in town. No one had seen the twins' children. The local doctor became visibly uncomfortable when asked. Homer also learned the twins had made unusual purchases: large quantities of lime, excavation tools, and heavy rope. Homer began observing the property from a distance. He noticed lights moving at unusual hours and figures in the yard before dawn. His curiosity turned into determination. He needed to discover what was really happening. During this period, Phoebe became pregnant for the third time. The twins became even more secretive. The third child was born in the summer. When Waldo finally saw the baby, a girl, he was shocked to see the deformities were even more severe. What most disturbed him was realizing the twins were meticulously documenting every aspect of their children's development, referring to them not by names, but by clinical descriptors. One dawn, Homer made his final visit. He approached silently through the trees. Through a basement window, he witnessed something that made him question his own sanity. The basement had been divided into sections, each showing signs of occupation. Homer saw the twins moving between them, carrying food and water. The sounds from inside the sections were clearly human, clearly from children. Homer realized with horror that the twins were keeping their own children confined in the basement. But Homer Mixon never left that property again. His absence was noticed days later. A search was organized, but they never found him. The only clue was his rifle abandoned in the forest near the Oates property. When questioned, the twins seemed genuinely surprised and concerned. But from that moment on, a dark legend began to grow around the Oates property. People began whispering that the family protected their secrets lethally. Phoebe's fourth pregnancy occurred later that year. The child was born the following spring. This time, not even Waldo knew about the birth until weeks later. When he finally saw the child, a boy, he discovered it appeared physically normal, but there was something disturbing about its behavior. The child rarely cried, rarely moved, and had an empty look that didn't seem to focus on anything. And in the dark, modified basement of the Oates house, the twins continued their work, guarding their secrets and their specimens from a world they had long ago decided to shut out.